Good evening. I'm Aaron Pallas, the chair of the Department of Education Policy and Social Analysis. And on behalf of the department and TC's offices that support career education and professional development, I'm delighted to welcome you to this Spotlight and Networking event. It's a two-phase event. The first phase, we have 6 distinguished alumni from the programs that are in EPSA who are going to talk about their own industries and careers and how their experiences at TC have sort of paved the way for the kinds of things that they're doing now. And they'll each talk for about 7 minutes each. And we'll then have some opportunities for questions and answers that you might pose to them. And then there'll be an opportunity to network and to engage with them more directly over some food and drink for the remaining time that we have. So I'm delighted to let you know that we've got Stephen Harkey and Rachel Langley and Ria Mehta, Vanessa Morris, Naja Shah, and Jennifer Stillman. And they'll each talk about themselves, and I hope you've got the little bios that describe them in front of you. Gratefully for me, I don't have to keep time, because if any of you have seen me in class, I'm a terrible timekeeper. Can't control a class, but fortunately the staff is going to keep them more or less on schedule. So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to turn the microphone over to, I guess we're going to go in alphabetical order by last names, which means Stephen is up.
All right, thank you very much. We talked about this beforehand, and I think we're going to talk from our seats and pass the microphone, maybe. All right. How's everyone doing? Good. So my name's Stephen Harkey. I am definitely the least distinguished member of this panel, but probably the closest in experience to where you're all at right now. And so I think my remarks will probably differ a little bit because I have a lot less to say about my career since I graduated this past December. So very recently left TC. Prior to coming here, I was a teacher. I started my career in City Year in Philadelphia as a volunteer because I studied public relations undergraduate, and that was not the direction I wanted to go in, so volunteering was my foot in the door in education. From there, I got a job teaching at Brooke Charter School in Boston. I started as a 3rd grade science teacher, and then moved into a 1st grade all-inclusive classroom. While I was here, I studied economics and education. I interned at the Manhattan Institute, the Charles Koch Institute, and the New York City Department of Education. And now I'm currently working at the Democracy Prep Public Schools in the Office of Data Analytics. And that's where I'm at right now. So while I was at Teachers College in the Econ and Ed program, the things that I wanted to make sure I did when I went back for a graduate degree were to get hard skills. I didn't want to go back and make the same mistake I had made in undergrad and leave school with a lot of good things to say, but not a lot of skills in the marketplace. So the reason, as I was shopping around for master's degrees, that the Econ and Ed program sort of appealed to me was because it was very quantitatively focused, and I felt like in going and pursuing a career in policy, that was something that I knew was tangible and that would add value when I entered the labor market. It turns out that that is absolutely true, and I probably should have pursued those skills even more while I was here. Some of the courses that were really valuable were multiple regression analysis. My colleagues were fortunate enough to take, I wasn't, but a lot of the people in my cohort took a course with Sarah Cajotes and find her to be an invaluable person to take a course with while you are here at Teachers College. She teaches a lot of the statistical courses that are associated with both the Ed Policy and the Econ and Ed programs. And everyone that I know of who's taken a class with her found it extremely valuable. Multiple regression analysis, introduction to data analytics in R, all these courses, they might be the ones that scare you away a little bit more. They're definitely quant heavy. Learning a new language, a data language, can be sort of off-putting to a lot of people, and it might be more fun to go into the classes that are more contextual, where there's going to be a lot of active debate, where you dig into some of these issues and you argue about them and the policies and the politics. But the work being done right now increasingly is data-driven. That's been true from my perspective for the past decade. That looks like the way a lot of education decisions are being made, and I'm sure that my colleagues can probably speak to that more effectively than I can. But the one thing that I noticed while applying to jobs was that the one thing people were looking for were Can you program in R? Can you program in Stata? Can you do these? It's great that you know statistics, that you know these analytics. It's great that you can talk about the problems that exist in the education sector, but can you do this work for us? What value do you add right when you are hired? And can you come in and do this job? Those were the questions that a lot of hiring managers wanted to know. Something that Sarah Cahotis did for a lot of us was that, and even though I wasn't in a class with her, she put this together as something, I forget the name of the document, and if you email her, I'm sure she'd be happy to share it with you, but it's something that gives you a sample of some of the data work that they will have you do when you apply for a data job in education policy. A huge part of my application process for all of the jobs that I applied to was they gave you a 24-hour or 48-hour data task. Normally it involves cleaning data, removing any null entries, and then doing some sort of rudimentary analytics of it. Not normally a regression, something pretty simple. Take averages of students from population X, accounting for population Y. Almost every single position had you do something like that as part of the interview process once you got through the phone interview and they knew that you weren't a crazy person. So I would make sure that if there's something that you do while you're here, if you're confident that you want to pursue a career in education policy, take some of the classes that the course descriptions and the syllabi might scare you a little bit more than the others. Take some of the ones that definitely push your quantitative skills, learn one of those 3 disciplines, whether it's R, Stata, or SPSS. Really dig deep because you're paying for master's students a year and a half of courses, 11 courses in a project. Make them add value to you when you enter the labor market. Don't just take the fun classes. They're definitely more interesting, but the data classes are what people hire for aggressively. And you can definitely get jobs without taking those classes, but even if you're pursuing something that's less quant heavy, people who understand how quant works and can read spreadsheets, that's extremely valuable as well. So never, never discount these quantitative courses and the impact they can have. In terms of what TC did for me, besides the compilation of information that Sarah Cahotis put together, Joe was extremely helpful reviewing my resume. Definitely helped with that. Told me to remove some things, add some other things, and I did that. And once I followed his advice, I got a job. So that's the best suggestion for pursuing his advice I can make. But take advantage of your professors. The relationships and networks that your professors have access to are also extremely valuable, and I wouldn't discount those either. They might be hard to pursue, and you might have more pressing concerns while you're in New York City as a student. There's a lot of fun things and a lot of distractions. But even if you don't need help, I'd go to office hours. Make sure you have strong relationships with at least 2 professors while you're here. Professors that you're able to take more than 1 course with will remember you better than a professor you only take 1 course with, even if you get a good grade in that course. And Professor Ebley, who is my advisor here, actually just hired me back on to be a research assistant with him a year, almost a full year after I've left. And that's really helpful because he knows that after this job I'm in right now that I'll be pursuing PhD applications, and that's a bear if you don't have RA experience. And those are the types of things that I would recommend to you. Go after the quantitative courses, use the resources that are here, and develop a really strong relationship with at least 2 professors, and that will hopefully help you avoid some of the situations that I fell into after I left.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel. I'm a 2012 graduate in the Ed Policy program. There's so much of what you shared, Stephen, that I would echo, and I think the biggest piece is around getting some course experience around data. And I had some thoughts in thinking about just having kind of a data sense. I completely agree that for really a lot of roles that folks are hiring for in the education space right now, having at least some sense of how to look at data, make sense of it, and know what to do with it. All different roles, a variety of ways you can do that, but that was immensely helpful in my time at TC. Just wanted to say that before I forget. But a little bit about me, I'm a senior program manager at the National Math and Science Initiative. I actually started with them in September, so it's a pretty new gig for me. And the New York City team at the National Math and Science Initiative is a partner with the New York City DOE's AP for All program. So that program sits under the Office of Equity and Access. And the primary goal of that program is that by fall 2021, 100% of New York City's high schools will offer 5 or more AP courses. So it's a really exciting program, one that I think is really critical for giving New York City students equitable access to rigorous college-level courses. And so I'm really excited to be doing this work. And in my role with NIMSY, I am overseeing a team of 6 people who are providing support. We're supporting nearly 300 schools this year. And the folks that I manage are going into the schools and providing school-level support, primarily to school administrators, but to the folks in the building that are really running AP programming in the school. And the job of the folks I manage is to, one, make sure there's just several operational steps that have to take place in running AP programming in your school. So they make sure that folks know what to do along the way. But they're also going to be working with folks to think about how can we really build a culture around AP in our building, and how do we recruit and engage students who maybe hadn't thought of themselves as AP scholars? How do we get them excited and taking an AP course they might find scary? So like I said, I am new to this work. My role is new, and I am just in the process of finishing hiring my team. So it's a very new piece of the work on this team that I'm really excited to be doing. Prior to NIMSY, I worked at the New Teacher Project, or TNTP, for about 7 years, and I wore all different hats in that organization. I actually started my career at TNTP while I was still in grad school at Teachers College. So one of the big reflections I had, and things I really encourage you all to do, is really cultivate the relationships that you're building here in your program with your professors, but with each other. I actually heard about TNTP and this part-time internship that they were hosting that fit perfectly with my course schedule from a fellow student who was also working at TNTP and had recently gotten hired there. I actually finished my final semester, got hired full-time at TNTP, got hired on their research and evaluation team. So again, echoing a lot of the data background that I got here, but also pairing it with courses like policy memo writing, and what do we do with data? How do we communicate it effectively? Those were the experiences that I think got my foot in the door with TNTP. But I wore a bunch of different hats while I was there. I ended up working on their business development team. I managed grants for them. The work that I really fell in love with was working with folks to set goals and manage, really come up with plans to manage your progress toward those goals throughout the school year. So I started as like a real data nerd coming out of TC, but I realized through that evolution at TNTP, I really, really love coaching people and managing people. And so the other reflection I had in just thinking about my winding journey from TC to here is I really only in the last year or so had paused to think about what's the kind of work that really gives me a lot of joy, and what is it about what I'm doing that excites me? So it's not just, oh, I'm good at data. It's, what is it about data that I really like? That's how I came up with, I really like communicating about data to people. At TNTP, I realized, why do I like talking about goals with people? Well, it's because I like the coaching process. I wish I had done a lot more of that in my actual TC program, and I really encourage you all to think about that as well. What is it about the courses you're taking? If there's a course you really love, why do you love it? Like, what are the things that you're doing in your homework, in your projects that really excites you? And think about the opportunities that could lend themselves to giving you more of those experiences. I don't think I would have looked for a job like the one I have at NIMSY if I hadn't done that reflection and thought about, I actually really like coaching and managing people. And now that's what I get to do every day. So yeah, I think those are the big pieces of advice. Oh, last thing, guys, Gosha Kolb's email blasts are gold. The job openings, I still subscribe to those as a hiring manager, I give her all of the roles I hire for. I give her roles that my friends are hiring for. I got my current roles like through hearing it, like getting heads up through those email blasts. So those are very important. Make sure they come to your inbox and not your spam. That is my last piece of advice.
Hi, my name is Ria Mehta. I am currently, I was a 2015 alumni, which seems like a really long time ago, but really near at the same time. I'm currently the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the NYC DOE, and that sounds like a pretty big role and title. And I do have to say that I worked really hard to get to this place where I can now be able to connect what systems and structures that are in the DOE to actual key stakeholders outside of the office. And so basically what that means is that in strategic partnerships, I'm making relationships and connections with key stakeholders in the system, like superintendents and our field support center liaisons and the UFT, which is our union, and able to connect with shared goals and bring that back into the office, to be able to have a continuous feedback loop, to make sure that we're actually meeting their needs, and be able to have real conversations about shared goals when we're implementing big items like a $34 million grant in the Bronx for all of the schools in order to build their pipeline and retain their teachers, because the Bronx really needs it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about my core values and what I believe that has helped me get to the place that I am in. I'm one of the youngest directors ever to be promoted. It takes a long time. I've heard it 10 years for people to get into a director position that I'm in. But I feel like these core values I'm about to talk to you about have really helped me. The first one is growth mindset. And people throw around that word a lot. What does growth mindset actually mean? And to me, I believe that you actually don't have to come in to the role knowing data. You don't really have to know how to use Excel. You just want to know how to use Excel because you know that's a need in order to do the work. Because that you actually want to grow yourself, because you want to meet the needs of actually empowering students and having them have a great environment with great teachers and great school leaders and great curriculum. So I've actually hired people, at least 3, who aren't experts in Excel, that they don't know data systems. And they don't know how to analyze it, they don't know how to manage it, but they want to. And all of them have succeeded greatly. So I always ask to determine if you have a growth mindset or not, when have you taken initiative previously to fill a need? And by actually hearing them, and if they actually feel that need and it was successful and they learned a new skill, then I can see that they push themselves and they're able to be a self-learner. That they're able to be that vulnerable to be able to say, okay, I need to learn this skill, whether it be Photoshop, whether it be graphic design, evaluations, data, R, and they're able to actually be motivated to actually learn a new skill in order to actually succeed in whatever initiative they're doing. Another way for a growth mindset is actually taking initiative, and I think that this is something that people may be scared to do. But when you're first taking on a job, I think it's always people are testing you and seeing oh, how hard are you able to work? But if you actually are able to listen to people and see, okay, there need to be more marketing materials, there needs to be a data report or a one-pager or some kind of synthesis. Someone needs to actually go to a school to be able to get some data or actually talk to some people. And if they actually do that without being asked and it actually produces some kind of result, then you're actually feeling that need and taking that initiative. Another core value of mine is being proximate to the work. I'm not sure how many people in this room have been a teacher or how long ago you were a teacher, but in education, we're trying to fix the classroom. So Richard Elmore, which I hope everyone in this room knows his name, the instructional core is really important because teaching and learning starts in the classroom. And if we're behind a desk all day trying to make decisions for those who are in the classroom, it's not going to work. Small classroom sizes, Common Core, we've heard it all. It's not necessarily a strategy that failed at the implementation, it was the implementation and execution because it didn't start from the classroom. And it has to have a backwards mapping design where you actually are listening to teachers and students and school leaders who are actually doing the work. And so I force myself at least 2 days a week to go to schools, to talk to people. And that's why I got to the role that I'm right now, strategic partnerships, because I know school leaders, I know superintendents, and I took the time to listen without anyone asking. Another core value I have is follow-up and thoughtfulness. And I've interviewed a lot of TC people, I have a lot of people with like master's degrees, and one thing that I always look for is, what's your follow-up? What's your thoughtfulness? Did you actually listen to me? Did you take the extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes to actually handwrite a follow-up thank you note? Or quote something that I said that I actually value? Because that means that I know that you're a listener and that you're actually going to listen to the work that needs to be done the most. And it just takes like an extra 10 minutes or 15 minutes to put a stamp on an envelope and mail it to someone. But that's just like my branding. That's what I like to do. But what is it that you like to do that shows that other people that you actually value what they're saying and make that connection that you're going to be able to make a good relationship? Lastly, what I'm going to talk about is something that I believe that is really important, doesn't get said enough, is know your role in your next job. Is it the district leader? Is it the data analyst? Is it the teacher? Is it the principal? Is it the superintendent? Because at every level of the system, people have to know their role. And what I mean by that is that me as a district leader, my job is not to define the curriculum for a teacher. My job is not to define how a school leader should be trained and prepared. My job is to coordinate resources and actors and structures and systems in order for teaching and learning to thrive in schools. And so when I go into schools, I actually am making that connection and able to know this is my mindset, this is my frame. And it's important because a lot of times the work gets confused. We start talking about curriculum and actually how to like design like the pipeline when actually what is my role and what do I have control over in the system before everyone's doing the same thing and things are not executed and implemented in a way that makes sense. And the last thing I will say is that I really believe that people who are self-aware of themselves and actually how they come off really are successful. So a question that I always ask, and if I had to choose one question to ask in an interview, is when have you ever been misperceived professionally? And it's not because I want to know that they're misperceived. It's actually, how did you respond to it? We all know when we have been misperceived. But how did you respond to it that you actually valued what the other person said and you actually were able to be not defensive? So it's an awareness of how you come across and how you build through that and go through it. So that's it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Vanessa Morest, and I think I'm the dinosaur on the panel here because I graduated a long time ago. I won't even say, but and I may also seem like an anomaly because I'm working in higher education, and so what I do right now is I'm the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost of Westchester Community College. But most of my career pathway has actually not been purely administrative. And so I started out here, I was in the Sociology of Education program. I got my master's degree and my doctorate in that. When I first arrived at TC, though, I was actually hoping to be in the policy program, but there wasn't one at the time. That's probably one of my first lessons of being both an immigrant and a first-generation student, was that you can actually show up at graduate school into a program that's not there. And so in some ways, I think that kind of helped take me on the pathway of community colleges, where most of my career has been focused, although my dissertation work was not. It was actually on charter schools. So, but at any rate, so I was here for 10 years working with Tom Bailey at the Community College Research Center. And after that, I left and I went to Norwalk Community College, where I was the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness for a number of years. And then I took on the role of Chief Academic Officer there in an interim position. And now I've been at Westchester Community College for the last year and a half. I guess, yeah, it's about a year and a half. So I don't know how many of you know what a Vice President for Academic Affairs does, but basically right? It seems obvious, but it's not. And I think Provost is an even more confusing title, actually, for most people. But what I do is I basically oversee all the faculty in the curricular programs. There are 64 programs there. There are 166 full-time faculty and about 350 part-time faculty. We also have about 75 academic staff, academic affairs staff. So those are the people I work with. And basically, I have to oversee all parts of it other than the curriculum and the faculty. I also oversee accreditation and high school partnerships and distance education, faculty professional development, all kinds of things like that. And so scheduling, which is interesting. Actually, my least favorite part of the job is I'm also supposed to close the college for bad weather. And that's like almost traumatizing to me, but because you can never win with that. Everyone's always unhappy whether you keep it open or closed. So at any rate, so that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I thought what I would talk to you about, since I have been working, out in the field for quite a while, is sort of some of the major transitions and what happens, or what was going through my mind when I made those transitions. I do think I'll come back to TC in a second, but I think, one transition was moving from TC to Norwalk Community College. That was a really tough decision, and I think about 2/3 of it were really personal, but the other part of it was I felt professionally that I was teaching and doing research in education, but I had no practical experience. And the words of my first mentor here, Robert Crane, were clear in my mind, which was Bob Crane always encouraged people to start by teaching and then get into policy. And so I felt like I really needed some practical experience as an educator. And so I had this opportunity to go over to NCC, and so I did that. The first thing I did when I started to think about doing that, though, was I set up an internship there for myself. And Tom Bailey at CCRC, well, now president of Teachers College, was very supportive of that. I went one day a week for a full academic year and basically sat at a little desk at Norwalk Community College and got a sense of what it would mean to be an administrator at the college. And I got to know people, I got to understand the work, and I got to build a kind of comfort zone, like, okay, I can do this. It's not gonna freak me out too much to leave Teachers College and doing research and do this. And so I would really encourage you to do that. If you can set up an opportunity for yourself to test out something you're interested in doing, don't be afraid to do that. Just ask, and people will give you opportunities. The second sort of major transition was when our academic dean left at Norwalk Community College. And so I'd been there for about 7 years or so. And I volunteered for that position because I suddenly realized, like, what am I going to do next? And I think I want to give this a try. And so that was kind of huge. So I think the advice there is, when an opportunity presents itself, just you should go for it. They don't come along every day, and opportunities can really take your career in some interesting directions. So that was really important. And then a third major transition was moving from NCC over to Westchester Community College, which is basically a 20-mile distance. But it's twice the size, it's in the SUNY system, and so there were lots of reasons to make it interesting to me, but the hardest part of that was recognizing that I had to switch jobs and switch to a different college in order to advance my career. And so I think as you're thinking about your future and you're thinking about the next 15, 20 years, which is a really long way out for most people, and I certainly was never thinking of it that way when I was here, I think it's important to realize that you're inevitably going to have to make some big changes, and they're hard, and sometimes they involve moving and things like that. I did not need to move, and that was by design and not the easiest thing to do. But I did find a job that I didn't have to geographically relocate for. So in terms of Teachers College, oddly enough, so this was the late 90s is when I started here, and I know, cringe, right? I came in here with one thought in mind, which was, it's funny that you should say it, because I said to myself, I want to leave with some quantitative skills. I felt like that was the one marketable thing I could get. So I wanted to learn about educational policy, and then Dr. Crane talked me into being a sociologist, and that was all fine. But I really felt like I needed some marketable skills. And so I did really kind of load up on the quantitative classes, statistics. I learned SPSS. I learned on SPSS 9. How about that? You had to type it all into syntax. There were no windows. But that taught me an awful lot. And I ended up using those skills pretty much throughout my whole career. I still have SPSS on my computer. I still work on it that way. Data-driven decision-making is huge. Analytics, metrics, all of that, knowing how to do those things has really been a consistent theme in my career. So I think you're getting some good advice from these folks. Thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Hi. Thank you. We can talk back to each other. My name is Naja Shaw, and I'm currently the Director of Program Design at Teach for America, New York. In that work, I'm basically charged with writing our leadership development curriculum. Teach for America is a leadership development organization and has undergone changes from teacher development to leadership development. And we have a theory of leadership. In New York City, we have a theory of leadership development based off of the leaders that we believe that our school system here needs. That's highly contextual. To tell you more about who I am a Harlem girl who never thought that I could step on the campus of Columbia and graduated, so I was very happy about that. But I recognize that there are so many people across the park, down the street, that don't feel like this space is theirs. So I just often say that because I grew up 20 blocks away and never thought that I could step foot on this campus. But through my work, and as a Harlem girl, I often described myself as an educational vagabond. I always felt like I had to leave my community to get a good education. Luckily, I grew up in urban poverty, so there are nonprofits around to help you out. So I was a part of Summer Bridge, did my summers there. I did a Better Chance, and the first time I saw the true disparity of the inequity that exists within our education system is when I went to boarding school in North Andover, Massachusetts, and had to transfer basically different world context and code switch from the age of 12, right? I say that because I reckon in my whole educational autobiography, I recognize that the adults in front of kids matter. And through my experiences, I was able to clarify what I wanted to do to make sure that the adults have the right mindsets and dispositions so that they're not perpetuating inequitable systems within their classrooms. So when I think about what's needed when you make a choice of what you want to do next following your degree, I think it's important that you clarify your vision for what equity looks like. Can you articulate what equity looks like? At TC, you're reading all the articles, learning about systemic oppression and how it manifests on every single level, but can you articulate for yourself what's making you tick? What is your guiding light for the choices that you make from whatever organization you want to be a part of? The next thing I think is super, super important is your ability to build relationships. And I don't say like you know the name of a person's dog or that they love to do yoga and you can make great connections in this way, but actually how are your motivations aligned with someone else's? How are you able to build those clear relationships that will lead towards systems change? Who are you going to partner with? That person is sitting next to you in your class. That person is probably in this room, right? But taking the time to learn about what motivates people will allow you to have meaningful relationships that can sustain you. Another thing I think is important is you have to be responsive to whatever context that you're negotiating. You have to be strategic in every action. If you have a clear vision and guiding light based off of who you are, the actions that I'm going to take as a Black woman from Harlem are going to be very different than your own. So you have to take the time to do that. I think similar to what was said earlier, I think that a growth orientation is very important. You can learn the same lesson over and over and over again. I'm seeing some nods, but not apply it. When you grow, that means that you've applied that lesson. So taking the time to critically reflect and ask yourself, am I clear on what I want to be true and the change I want to happen that's going to be different for every single person in this room? Am I building meaningful relationships that are strategic in nature? Am I clear on how I'm best positioned to make a change based off of the context that I'm negotiating, and am I applying the lessons that I'm learning? My headline for like post-graduation is that you need to do your self-work. Down the line, I forget your name. What's your name? Yours? Rhea. Rhea was able to like clearly define her core values. That's going to be your internal compass for no matter where you're at. Teach for America is my employer that I loan my gifts to, right? I'm gonna say it again. Teach for America is my employer that I loan my gifts to. And I wouldn't be there if I wasn't aligned to mission and vision, but my internal compass are my core values, trust, growth, and equity. And I need to be able to like acknowledge the limitations of my perspective, and so forth. I think that after being at TC, I was able to, in my program, my first year I was the Dean of Students and Upper School Math Dean at AF. And then my second year I started my current position, and I was able to consistently apply what I was learning in my classes to my like current roles. It was a gift to be able to do that, to learn how like these big problems and these big questions that we're asking ourselves like manifest on the micro level, right? So I think it's important to do the self-work because you're probably going to join an organization following your program that isn't your mission. But if you're clear on what your internal compass is, why you're there, what equity looks like, then you'll be able to like work on your passion projects, align with other like-minded folks who want to work towards systems change in the same way that you want to. And when we talk later, we can talk more about it. Sounds good? Okay.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Stillman, Dr. Jennifer Stillman. I got my PhD in 2011. I guess just a brief career history before I kind of get into what I just laid out as things to think about when you're looking at what do I want to do after this. I started my career working on Capitol Hill for a senator because I wanted to be a government teacher, but I felt like I couldn't teach government until I knew anything about government. So I kind of went and did the experience. Then I became a government teacher in Fairfax County, Virginia for a couple of years. Then I moved up to New York City and taught government and politics and other social studies up here in New York for several years. And then I decided to kind of blend my passions of government and policy with education, and my doctorate's in the politics and education program here. My dissertation was exploring gentrification and school integration. And then I graduated and ended up doing nothing at all related to that. So I found it was strange to become an expert in something, which is what happens when you get a doctorate. You are now an expert. But I couldn't find a job that actually had anything to do with my expertise directly. And so I sort of had to be open to looking for anything else that might interest me, which I was actually fine with because I find I'm interested in lots of things. And when people try to talk to me about gentrification and education, I'm like, I'm kind of tired of talking about that. Can we talk about something else? Because after years of doing research, sometimes you just get tired of thinking about the same thing over and over and over. I think, I'm not sure how many of you are doctorate students versus master students. How many of you are working on doctorates? Anyone? No one? Okay. Well, the first thing I was going to talk about was sort of academia versus non-academia, but if no one's getting a doctorate, then maybe that's not relevant to what you're even thinking about. I ended up not choosing academia, in part because I just thought it would be more interesting to kind of go out there and do the work instead of like researching what other people were doing, but actually be more engaged in doing the work. So the second question that I kind of think people are asking, and this was sort of related to what you were just saying about, like, you know, what is your passion? What is your vision? Like, what is it that you really want to do? Can you take a job at an organization that you don't necessarily feel passionate about? And I think we can all say we feel passionate about, like, we want to make schools better or something in that very general framework. I mean, I was trying to think, like, all of you are giving great advice. I'm like, what is my mission statement? Like, what are my core values? And I just wrote down, like, I know schools are often just kind of crappy. Like, a lot of school sucks. How can we make it better? Like, that's kind of what I'm always trying to figure out. Like, how can we make school better? But there's not a simple answer to that, and I feel like there's so many ways to achieve these things. So when you're looking for a job, how aligned do I have to be with exactly what this organization is doing? And my answer to that question personally was, like, if I'm going to work in advocacy, then you probably should be aligned, because it's hard to advocate for something if you don't actually believe in it. But if you're working in evaluation and research, which a lot of folks up here are, do I need to feel passionate about the thing I'm evaluating, or is that actually a hindrance to being a good evaluator of the thing that I'm doing? So I'm currently the director of evaluation at New Classrooms Innovation Partners. We run a personalized middle school math program. And it's super interesting, but, like, personalized learning, take it or leave it. Like, I actually don't feel mission aligned with my employers, where I'm like, yes, personalized learning every day. I feel like this is an interesting thing they're doing. My job is to look at the data and figure out, like, is this working? It's to work with external research partners and have them figure out, is this thing working? And I think that in some ways it helps me to not actually feel passionate about personalized learning, because I can be more objective and kind of trying to answer this question. Is this thing, like, how can you make this thing better? What's working, what's not working? Let's just talk about it sort of dispassionately. However, that may not endear you with your employers, because they actually want you to be passionate about the thing they're doing. So I think a lot of, like, any challenges I've had as a professional are sort of my ability to be passionate about things, because employers want you to really be into their thing. So it's just something to think about. One of the questions I was asked when I got interviewed for this job as director of evaluation was sort of, what do you do if you see data and, you know, there's different ways to interpret it and you're not sure the thing is working? I gave some speech about how, you know, I believe in spin. There is no right answer. Like, everything can be looked at in multiple ways. Of course, you know, there are ways to interpret this. And I think that's the reason I got the job, because I think this position had been open for like a year, and I think everyone else was like, you have to look for the truth. It's all about the truth. And I'm like, yeah, you know, there's lots of ways to do this. So I feel like being open to letting people know that you will do what you need to do for the job is sort of important in that respect. I only have a minute left, maybe less than a minute. All this talk about data, just one point I wanted to make was that my dissertation was qualitative. I only took like 2 of the data classes. I feel like I failed in getting enough data courses, but I feel like if you're just confident that you can figure something out, sort of to the point of like, are you willing to learn how to do something? You get in the workplace and you realize lots of people are sort of faking it. Like, everybody's Googling everything to figure out how to do the thing that they forgot how to do, and it's okay to just sort of be confident that you're an intelligent person who can figure things out, and nobody needs to know that you're not an amazing quant person innately, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I am in the Ed Policy Master's Program, and I was here a few years ago, and I went to work for a school that I did a consulting project for while I was here and never finished my degree because I was totally absorbed in that. And then have now come back to finish the degree. And one of the reasons I came back, so I am not compared to some people, but compared to most people, I'm sort of a data person, and the role that I was in was a data role. But I felt like there was a real ceiling to that, in the sense that sometimes I felt like a human calculator, basically. That like they just wanted me to sit at my desk and like calculate the numbers that they asked me to calculate and not have opinions. And so I guess, have you seen that there's a downside to, so when my mom was in college, she went to Smith College in the 60s, and she told me that she was given advice, do not learn how to type, because if you do, you'll get hired as a secretary. And so have you seen a downside to data and to having data skills? And how do you get around that? Like, how do you get out of the box of just like the number cruncher, basically?
Thank you. I can share a little bit about my experience with that because I remember being hired, and it was my first full-time job, and it was on the research and evaluation team on an analyst track, essentially. And it was something that I was very good at. And when you're good at something at work, people are going to keep, to your point, people keep asking you to do it. Yes. Yeah, and I think one example to illustrate that, there was this massive, crazy Excel file that a bunch of people that did not have data skills prior to me coming on had. There were like 10 people owning this file at once, and everyone was adding comments and weird columns, and so I inherited this beautiful system, and my job was to own it and fix it, essentially, as the data person. And I don't think I have a right answer necessarily. Just speaking to my experience, I think I was starting to see myself really get pigeonholed by doing data work effectively, and in doing some of the reflection I was speaking to earlier, I was like, I don't have fun doing this day to day, and I'd like to do less of this. I don't know what I want to do as a career necessarily, but I know I don't want to do this day to day. And I would join conversations, meetings where folks were actually taking some of the data I was using and talking about, so what do we do with this in our program? Like, how do we, and so I started to look to those opportunities of how can I get a foot in the door to actually start to share more recommendations from the data and not just be the number cruncher, but, and a lot of this I have to give credit to having really great managers who advocated for me, but my goal was to get to the table where I could say, I know the data really well, but I also know our program context really well. I know it's going to work based on the data that I have. And for me, in my experience, that's what helped me move out of a purely quant data role and into a role where now I still have to know how to use data, but I am not handling data day to day. I'm working with people day to day, which I enjoy much more. And I think it's because I found those opportunities to take what I did really well on the data side, but pivot into how do I make this practical for people out in the field or for my organization.
Just that I think sometimes you just have to change organizations if you want to reinvent yourself, and when you apply for the next job where you want to do the different thing, you tell them, I was doing this data work, but I realized I really wanted to be doing this, and that's why I left, and I want this opportunity, and you just kind of but if you stay within your own organization, it is hard for people to think of you differently from the thing that they hired you to be. So that's just one way to get out of it.
Good evening. I wanted to know, one, if any of you found yourself in the position wanting to blend like policy and practice while you were here at TC, and if so, what advice do you have for someone like myself who's a practitioner, but I am definitely interested in intersecting practice and the world of policy without, veering too much, without entering completely into the world of policy, like staying as close to practice as possible. Not necessarily teaching. I am a teacher now, but it can be even, working for the State Department of Education. It can be anything outside of the classroom or even outside of schools itself, but not being a policy analyst or just a complete, just a numbers person. So that's what I mean. Does that?
Thank you. So I completely, commend you for saying you are wanting to melt the two, because policy doesn't work without talking to the practitioners. This, for anyone is, under the delusion that being a policymaker is just isolated from the practitioner, it's not going to work. Then you're going to go through a lifetime of not having any success, having some strategies that just won't be implemented. And so the way that I personally have been able to do that is by not only believing in teacher leadership, those who are teachers in the classroom being able to take charge and be change agents, to be able to voice their instructional agenda for their school communities, those who are doing the work and have figured it out and then are able to open up their doors and shift the whole school community, which, by the way, what we have found that it actually is moving student achievement, that it actually is moving the whole school's retention. And in that way, to be able to define policy for the system, to make those contracted roles, to be able to have that to be sustainable for a teacher and be able to, basically say, hey, your profession doesn't have to just stop as a 20-year career. You can actually take a leadership role without having to leave the classroom. To be able to find that and be able to, work with people who are actually coaching those teacher leaders, that's how you melt the two, because then it becomes the practitioner defining the policy. Yeah.
I would also add that policy changes can happen on any level in the system, right? So I think that doing that practice now, so in your role as a teacher now, what are systems change that you can influence now? Because we know that leadership is not a role, right? So thinking through is my curriculum not responsive to my students? How can I work with other practitioners and build coalition and change what the curriculum is for my school site? How can I make sure that these things could happen across a network, if you're within a network, wherever it is? But thinking through the working towards systems change doesn't have to happen after your degree. That those are things that you can start now and begin to tell that narrative of how you've already thought of how you can shift policies in your current context.
I guess I would just add that, many leadership roles do integrate the two. And so as a practitioner, I think you need to think about opportunities to extend what you're doing. If you can join associations and take on a leadership role there in your whatever that might be, or within your school or your district or wherever it is that you're practicing, if you have opportunities to join committees, if there's a grant and there's some grant work that could be done, any opportunity that you have to be able to take everything that you know about your practice and extend it and share it and also analyze it and see whether it's replicable and what works, what doesn't, all of that I think is incredibly valuable and, much better for a practitioner to be rising into those leadership roles than just somebody who is purely trying to skip that step and go right into the leadership role through another route. I think I found just much more authentic work coming out of people who have real classroom and street level experience.
Good evening. My question is pretty simple. Just how, so we're all EPSA, well, I think all of us are EPSA students. How did you navigate EPSA? It has a lot of opportunities, a lot of resources, and so I just want to sort of know, are there any resources that you would recommend that we keep an eye out for? And also, are there any particular classes that you would recommend that we take on our journey to being practitioners or policymakers?
I think that depends a lot on what you want to do with the degree afterwards. In terms of resources, during the opening remarks, we talked about, relationships with advisors and also relationships with your peers, and that there's a lot of people here that can become your colleagues and coworkers in future roles. And a lot of people here are pretty bright and might have the entrepreneurial spirit to start something with you. In terms of courses, the course that, again, it depends on what you want to do. Because I was in the econ program, there was a development course taught by Professor Ebley that was incredibly valuable. There was a high school to college transitions course taught by somebody who's in the room that was incredibly valuable. But for the work that I do now, it was Intro to Data Analysis in R. My company does data analytics in R, and that's primarily besides Google Sheets, I think that's primarily what I use. And so in terms of marketing myself for that first job, and a lot of people here have said there are other things that matter more. You can learn the data at the job. In terms of what I think was most alluring to employers when I was looking for work, it was having at least that knowledge and that background to add value immediately, and then developing and demonstrating your skill set afterwards. And I really think that while you're here looking for certain courses that are going to matter to you, whether it's multiple regression or a data class in a certain hard skill set, I think those are things not to pass up, to reiterate something I said earlier.
For me personally, getting the opportunity to do a capstone project was immensely valuable. I think specifically, one, you're working with a real organization or district, and in that, I think what I found really helpful was you have to be able to learn how to navigate and work with the partner that you're engaging with, and think about what's their problem that they're trying to solve, what's the value I can add to this, and how can I really demonstrate my writing skills, all these other things that are critical to the class. But getting that real world experience in navigating those relationships, I found immensely helpful. And I also think just for relationship building, you may build a connection through a capstone project that turns into a job opportunity later, or someone you meet is someone that you become friends with, and down the road is a job opportunity. So I think that's immensely helpful. And I know I mentioned it before, go Shakol, but I would bring it back to say, I think any opportunity you can take, even if it is super part-time or limited, because I know graduate coursework is intense, but if you can do any kind of internships or opportunities to get some of that outside of the class experience, again, I think in particular, it may not be exactly what you go into for your career, but I think for building those relationships, I personally found to be really, really helpful.
I'm just going to add one more thing. Dr. Wolstedter's Craft of Policy Analysis, I think that's the name of it, but I still pull out that paper even to this day, because she teaches you how to actually make and define a policy challenge and in a succinct way, and actually be able to define what are the next steps in the implementation and recommendations. And that's exactly, you're going to have to be doing that whether you're a practitioner or a policy maker, because you have to define the challenge in a way that actually revolutionizes or gets people up.
So I'm not sure that I can speak to classes, but I will say that for me, the most significant thing was the mentorship of the faculty here. And actually, two of my mentors are right here, and I still stay in touch. And I not only learned substantively from them, but I also learned, I learned how to be a leader and how to think about education. And so I really encourage you to get to know the faculty. And the subject matter is important, but also, absorb everything that you can at TC. Go to, when there are seminars and lectures, go and listen and engage with that. It's a really unique opportunity And that's harder to recreate when you're out in the world at your job. So really take advantage of it. And I just wanted to say one other thing, which I didn't mention, which is that I work for a Teachers College graduate. I have, out of my team of 10, I have 2 direct reports who are Teachers College graduates. So they are everywhere. And I will say that I love working with these people because they're so well prepared. They have a national and very well-informed perspective, even though we're working in a small sort of microcosm of a college. And so, you know, you're doing yourself a big favor by being here. Take advantage of every second of it because it will pay off in ways that you can't even imagine now.
I had one to recommend if you don't have one. I think that my favorite class was like the least practical, most theoretical class that I took, which was Luis Huerta's organizational theory class. If he even still teaches it, I have no idea. But after teaching, I was so happy to be a student again, where someone else was planning all the lessons, and I could just sit there and take it all in. But that class it sort of helps you understand your experience as a teacher working in a system in a way that's just super interesting, and it just were things I'd never thought about before. Like a lot of grad classes, you're like, yeah, I know, I get it. It's sort of, in some ways, rehashing a lot of the things you've already thought about. But this org theory class was very new in so many ways, so I'd highly recommend it.
Well, okay, so I don't have any closing questions, but I want to thank Stephen, Rachel, Ria, Vanessa, Nadja, and Jennifer for sharing their experiences, and we are so proud of all of you, so glad that you're here and able to talk about how Teachers College has helped launch your careers, which are in various stages. And I'm delighted to now allow us to break and network a bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you.